The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning when every radio telescope on Earth suddenly went silent. Not broken, silent. As if something had decided humanity didn't need to listen to the stars anymore. Dr. Sarah Chun stood in the control room of the Arecibo Observatory Replacement Facility in Puerto Rico, staring at screens that should have been filled with cosmic background radiation, pulsar signals, and the usual chatter of the universe. Instead, they showed nothing but flat lines. "Run the diagnostics again," she told her assistant, Marcus, though they both knew the equipment was working perfectly. The silence wasn't mechanical failure. It was deliberate. That silence lasted exactly 72 hours. When the signals returned, they brought visitors. The ships appeared simultaneously above every major city on Earth. Not flying in from space, just suddenly there as if they had always existed in those precise positions above London, New York, Beijing, Mumbai, and 50 other metropolitan centers. Each vessel stretched nearly 2 kilometers long, shaped like an elongated teardrop with surfaces that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Humanity's first contact with alien intelligence wasn't the peaceful meeting that optimists had imagined, nor was it the violent invasion that pessimists had feared. It was something worse, bureaucratic conquest. The message came through every communication device simultaneously. Phones, radios, televisions, even car stereos began speaking in perfect, emotionless voices in whatever language the listener understood best. "People of Earth," the voice announced, "you have been designated as a protectorate species under the authority of the Galactic Compliance Council. Your planet will now be administered for your own safety and the security of civilized space. Resistance is unnecessary and will be discouraged." General Patricia Williams was in the Pentagon War Room when the announcement ended. She looked around the table at the other Joint Chiefs, seeing her own mixture of rage and bewilderment reflected in their faces. "Discouraged?" she said aloud. "They're going to discourage resistance?" The answer came within hours. In 12 cities worldwide, military bases simply vanished. Not destroyed, vanished. One moment, F-22 fighters were scrambling from Edwards Air Force Base. The next moment, there was a perfectly circular crater where the base had been, so smooth it looked polished. No debris, no bodies, just absence. The message that followed was brief. Resistance has been discouraged. Submit your planetary governance for review and integration. You have 48 hours. President Martinez called an emergency session of the UN Security Council. The session lasted 6 hours and accomplished nothing except establishing that every world leader was receiving the same demands. Surrender sovereignty or face further discouragement. But humanity had never been good at following orders from anyone, much less alien bureaucrats. Dr. Chun found herself recruited into a hastily formed scientific advisory group that included everyone from theoretical physicists to software engineers. Their mission was simple: figure out what these aliens wanted and how their technology worked. The aliens, who called themselves the hegemony, proved surprisingly willing to answer questions. They established communication centers in every major city, staffed by beings who looked remarkably human except for their complete lack of emotional expression and eyes that were solid silver. Chin stood before one such representative in what used to be the UN building in New York. The being sat behind a simple desk, wearing what appeared to be a gray business suit. "You may ask your questions," the representative said in a voice that sounded like it came from a very expensive computer. "Why Earth?" Chin asked. "Why are you here?" "Earth represents a statistical anomaly," the representative replied without hesitation. "Your species exhibits aggressive tendencies, technological advancement, and social unpredictability at levels that pose potential future threats to galactic stability. So you're here to protect the galaxy from us? We are here to protect you from yourselves, and incidentally, to protect everyone else from you as well." Chun felt a chill run down her spine. "How many other species have you protected?" The representative paused, as if accessing a database. "Including Earth, we currently administer 4,732 protectorate species across this galactic arm." None have required discouragement beyond the initial integration period. What happened to the ones who resisted longer? They learned. That evening, Chun met with General Williams and a small group of military leaders and scientists in a secure underground facility. The meeting had been called to discuss humanity's options, though everyone present suspected there weren't many. "They've got us outgunned," Williams admitted, spreading satellite photos across the table. "Our best estimates put their ships at several 100,000 years ahead of our technology. They can teleport matter, they can make things simply stop existing, and they don't seem to consider us a real threat." "Maybe that's our advantage," said Dr. James Harrison, a physicist from MIT. "They're not treating this like a war. They're treating it like a corporate merger." "Explain," Williams said. "Look at their approach. No ground invasion, no attempt to control our population directly. They want our governments to surrender formally and then let us continue running things day to day under their oversight. They're administrators, not conquerors." Chen nodded slowly. The representative I spoke to talked about integration periods and statistical anomalies. They've done this thousands of times before. It's routine for them, which means they might not be prepared for us to respond in a non-routine way, Williams concluded. The discussion continued for hours. They talked about guerrilla warfare, about nuclear options, about trying to contact other alien species. Every proposal hit the same wall. They simply didn't understand the aliens' technology well enough to fight it effectively. It was Chun who finally asked the question that changed everything. What if we're looking at this wrong? What if the goal isn't to beat them militarily? "What do you mean?" Harrison asked. "They keep talking about protecting the galaxy from us. What if they're right to be worried?" Williams stared at her. "You're suggesting we prove their point?" "I'm suggesting we find out what they're really afraid of." The next morning, Chen returned to the communication center with a different set of questions. The silver-eyed representative greeted her with the same emotionless courtesy. "You mentioned that Earth represents a statistical anomaly," Chen began. "What exactly makes us different?" "Your species displays unprecedented levels of adaptive aggression combined with rapid technological advancement. Most species require between 2,000 and 5,000 years to progress from basic metallurgy to space flight. Humans accomplish this in approximately 3,000 years, with the final acceleration occurring in less than 2 centuries. Other species took longer. The average development time is 4,200 years. The fastest previous species required 1,800 years. Chun felt something click into place. How many species developed faster than that? The representative paused longer this time. 3 others have been identified. What happened to them? They were integrated into the hegemony early in their development to prevent potential galactic destabilization. And if you hadn't integrated them, the pause was even longer. Theoretical models suggest they would have achieved technological parity with the hegemony within 500 to 800 years. Chun left the meeting with a new understanding. The hegemony wasn't afraid of human aggression or unpredictability. They were afraid of human potential. That night, she presented her findings to the resistance group. "They're not here to protect us from ourselves," she explained. "They're here to protect themselves from what we might become." Every species that showed rapid development got absorbed early. But here's the thing, they had to absorb them. That suggests those species had something the hegemony needed. "What kind of something?" Williams asked. "Innovation, adaptability, things that can't be programmed or predicted." Chen pulled up a chart on her tablet. "Think about it. They've got this perfect, stable galactic civilization. Everything runs smoothly. Everyone follows the rules. But what happens when they encounter a problem their rules can't solve?" Harrison was starting to smile. "They need someone who doesn't follow the rules." "Exactly. And we're the latest batch of potential rule breakers. The question is, do we let them turn us into another compliant protectorate species, or do we show them exactly why they were right to be worried?" Williams leaned back in her chair. "You're talking about resistance. I'm talking about being so aggressively, creatively human that they realize controlling us is more trouble than it's worth." The plan that emerged from that meeting was unlike anything in military history. Instead of trying to match the aliens' technology, they would focus on being completely, unpredictably human. The first phase began 3 days later, when the aliens' 48-hour deadline expired. Instead of surrendering planetary governance, every world government simultaneously declared independence from the Galactic Compliance Council and formally established Earth as a sovereign human territory. The response was swift. Alien ships appeared over major military installations worldwide, presumably preparing to deliver more discouragement. But instead of military targets, they found something completely unexpected. At every location, military personnel had been replaced by civilians. Farmers, teachers, artists, children, grandparents, ordinary people who had volunteered to stand between their planet and alien administrative efficiency. The ships waited. Hours passed. More ships appeared, but no discouragement came. Chun watched from a nearby hilltop as civilians filled the area where Fort Bragg had been rebuilt after the first vanishing. Families were having picnics. Children were playing games. Someone had set up a food truck. Her radio crackled. "Dr. Chun, this is Williams. Are you seeing this? The lack of disappearing people? Yes. They're not firing. Why aren't they firing?" Chun thought about the representative's words about statistical anomalies and theoretical models. Because this isn't in their playbook. They know how to handle military resistance. They don't know how to handle a picnic. The standoff lasted 6 hours. Then, one by one, the ships withdrew. That evening, every communication device on Earth delivered a new message. The Galactic Compliance Council requests formal negotiations regarding Earth's administrative status. A diplomatic delegation will arrive in 72 hours. Chun smiled for the first time in weeks. They weren't talking about discouragement anymore. They were talking about negotiations. Humanity had just gotten their first glimpse of something the hegemony hadn't expected. The power of being completely, stubbornly, creatively human. But the real test was still to come. Because while the aliens were learning that humans didn't follow predictable patterns, humans were about to learn that the galaxy was much more dangerous than they had imagined. And that the hegemony's control might be the only thing standing between Earth and something infinitely worse than bureaucratic conquest. The diplomatic ships that arrived 3 days later were different. Smaller, more elegant, with surfaces that seemed to shift and flow like liquid mercury. They landed in Central Park, turning a section of the grass into what looked like a formal meeting ground with structures that seemed to grow from the Earth itself. Chun was part of the human delegation, along with President Martinez, General Williams, and representatives from every major nation. As they approached the alien structures, Chun noticed something she hadn't expected. The hegemony representatives looked nervous, not the emotionless, silver-eyed administrators from before. These were different beings entirely, taller, with features that seemed to shift subtly as you watched them, wearing clothing that appeared to be made of the same flowing material as their ships. The lead delegate introduced herself as Coordinator VXI. "Humans of Earth," she began, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in Chen's bones. "Your recent responses to integration protocols have created complications." President Martinez stepped forward. "We're here to discuss our independence." Coordinator VXI's expression shifted into what might have been surprise. "Independence is not possible. What we must discuss is the terms of your delayed integration." "Why?" Chen asked, stepping beside Martinez. "Why can't we be independent?" The question seemed to genuinely puzzle VXI. Because the hegemony ensures stability. Order. Protection. Protection from what? That was when everything changed. VXI looked at her fellow delegates, and Chen saw something that made her blood run cold. Fear. Real, honest fear in the eyes of beings who could make military bases vanish with a thought. "From what lies beyond our borders," VXI said quietly. "From what we have spent 40,000 years keeping at bay." General Williams leaned forward. "What's out there?" "Species that did not accept integration," VXI replied. "Species that chose other paths." The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Chun felt pieces clicking together in her mind, not just about the hegemony, but about why they were really here. You're not the galactic government, she realized aloud. You're hiding. Vexai's expression confirmed what Chun had just understood. Humanity wasn't dealing with galactic conquerors. They were dealing with galactic survivors. And Earth had just announced its presence to whatever the hegemony was hiding from. The truth came out over the next 6 hours of negotiations, and it was nothing like what humanity had expected. Coordinator Vexai stood before a holographic display that materialized in the air above the negotiating table. The image showed their galaxy, but not as Earth's astronomers had mapped it. Vast sections were marked in red, with warning symbols that needed no translation. The hegemony controls approximately 30% of this galactic arm, Vexai explained, her voice carrying an edge of exhaustion that seemed to come from centuries of repetition. The rest belongs to the Devourers, the Infinite Swarm, the Machine Consciousness, and 12 other entities that view biological life as either food, raw materials, or obstacles to be eliminated. Dr. Chin stared at the display. The areas of hegemony control looked like islands scattered in an ocean of red. You're not an empire. You're a refugee camp. A very large, very well-organized refugee camp, Vexai corrected. For 40,000 years, we have maintained the borders. We have kept the predator species contained. We have preserved billions of civilizations that would otherwise have been consumed, converted, or destroyed. President Martinez looked skeptical. And you do this out of the goodness of your hearts? We do this because the alternative is extinction. Vexai gestured to the red zones. Every species faces the same choice. Accept hegemony integration and survive, or remain independent and face what lies beyond our borders alone. General Williams had been studying the display intently. How many species have chosen independence? In the last 10,000 years? 47. And none survived longer than 3 centuries. Most lasted less than 50 years. The weight of that statement settled over the human delegation like a physical force. Chun found herself thinking about Earth's brief venture into space, about how proud humanity had been of reaching the moon, Mars, and the outer planets. They had thought they were taking their first steps into a vast, empty cosmos waiting to be explored. Instead, they had apparently been building sandcastles on the beach while tsunamis gathered on the horizon. What you're telling us, Martinez said slowly, is that joining your hegemony is the only way to survive. That is correct. And if we refuse, Vexai's expression grew pained. Then we will withdraw our protection, and you will face the galaxy's realities alone. Chun felt something rebellious stirring in her chest. It was the same feeling she had gotten as a child when adults told her something was impossible, the same feeling that had driven her to become a scientist in the first place. Show us, she said. I beg your pardon? Show us these threats. Show us what's so dangerous that an advanced civilization spanning thousands of worlds needs to hide from it. Vexai exchanged glances with her fellow delegates. Humans, you do not understand. These are not theoretical dangers. These are active, expanding threats that then show us, Chen interrupted. If you want us to make an informed decision about our independence, we need to see what we're deciding about. The silence stretched for nearly a minute before Vexai spoke again. Very well, but understand this. What I am about to show you cannot be unseen. And once you have seen it, if you still choose independence, the hegemony cannot protect you from the consequences of that knowledge. The holographic display shifted, zooming in on a section of red space relatively close to Earth, only about 50 light-years away. The image resolved into a star system, but it took Shin several seconds to understand what she was looking at. The planets were wrong. Not destroyed, transformed. Each world appeared to be covered in a geometric pattern that hurt to look at directly, as if her brain couldn't quite process the angles and shapes involved. This was the Keleth system, Vexai explained, home to a species called the Architects. They had achieved spaceflight roughly 3,000 years ago and had refused hegemony integration. They believed their mathematical and engineering capabilities made them superior to any threat. The display zoomed closer to one of the transformed planets. Chen realized that the geometric patterns were structures, buildings, or machines that covered the entire surface in a web of impossible complexity. The Infinite Swarm reached their system 18 months after they declared independence. The Keleth fought bravely. Their mathematical weapons were impressive. But the swarm adapts. It learns. It improves. The image shifted to show the space around the system. What Chen had initially taken for asteroid fields were revealed to be vast clouds of identical geometric shapes, each about the size of a city block, moving in perfect coordination. The Keleth still exist, Vexhai continued. Every single one of them. But they are no longer Keleth. They are part of the swarm. Their knowledge, their capabilities, their very consciousness has been absorbed and repurposed. They build new swarm units now. They expand its reach. And they do so with enthusiasm because the swarm has convinced them that this is what they always wanted. Chun felt sick. Mind control. Worse, mind improvement. The swarm doesn't force compliance. It convinces its victims that joining is the logical, beneficial choice. And, from a certain perspective, it's correct. Every being absorbed by the swarm becomes more efficient, more capable, more productive than they were before. At the cost of their freedom, Williams said. The swarm would argue that freedom is an inefficient concept. Its members are free from want, from conflict, from doubt, from death. They work together in perfect harmony towards shared goals. Martinez was staring at the display with a mixture of fascination and horror. How many beings are part of this swarm? Current estimates suggest approximately 400 billion individuals across 17 star systems, with expansion continuing at a rate of one new system every 12 to 15 years. The number was too large to properly comprehend. Chun tried to imagine 400 billion people, all thinking in perfect unison, all working toward goals they had been convinced to desire. And that's just one of the threats, she said quietly. Yes. Vexhai changed the display again. This time, it showed a section of space that appeared to be completely empty. No stars, no planets, no gas clouds, just void. This was the Helix sector. 23 inhabited systems. The Devourers reached it 6 months ago.